that would resolve like 75% of nutritional issues. Everything you knew for the last 50 years is clearly wrong. Some people were more successful than others is some were more satiated than others. We want you to be at the diet that you could look us in the eye and say, this works for me. I could do this for the rest of my life.
What's the best diet for humans? Is there even such a thing? Or is it different for everybody? Arguably, the goal of nutrition science is to figure out what's the healthiest diet. It's also the topic of all this lively debate on the internet. There are few people alive who are more qualified to answer these questions than our guest today. Dr. Christopher Gardner is one of the most respected nutrition scientists in the world. He's professor of medicine at Stanford. He received his PhD in nutrition science from Berkeley, and for decades he's been running nutrition trials looking at the effect of different diets on health, weight loss, and disease risk. We had a fascinating conversation about food, health, and individual variability. Enjoy.
I mean, all this fighting over my diet is better than your diet and all these things. And and you're sitting there, you're one of the people who actually runs these trials, looking at scientific data on comparing these different diets. Do you think there is such a thing as a universal ideal diet or best diet for humans, or dietary pattern, however you want to call it, or do you think there's a different diet for everybody?
So I think there's a foundational diet. I think, like, as people are waiting for the genotype diet and the other thing, it's like, I swear, I think some people are holding out thinking, I know it. I'm the green jelly bean person. I'm the Dunkin' Donut person. I'm going to be the one who's predisposed to thrive on cotton candy. No, that is never going to happen. Cotton candy, green jelly beans, and Dunkin' Donuts are not healthy, not for anybody, right? And so I think we have this foundational diet of eat food, not too much, mostly plants, sort of the Michael Pollan kind of thing. Kind of as we did in Diet Fits, when we had a healthy low carb and a healthy low fat, we found very few differences at all on average. But when you looked individually at the hundreds of people in that study, some thrived and some failed on both of those diets. So I do think if we had a foundational diet, which I end up saying sort of as the inner core, is more whole foods and vegetables, less refined grain and added sugar. I don't know anyone who disagrees with that. Even keto and low-fat vegan agrees with that. I can't think of any more polar opposites than those two. They all agree on that. And in the US, we do all four of those things miserably. So like, couldn't we put our energy together to get those four? I think that would resolve like 75% of nutritional issues if we did that. And then I feel like there's a next core, beans. Everybody likes beans, except for lectins. Come on, get over it. Lectins are just not that bad. Fruit. It has sugar in it. Oh, come on. It's in a food matrix. It comes with fiber. Nuts. They have fat. Oh, come on. It's unsaturated. It's really not that big a deal. Eggs. They have cholesterol. Oh, let's go through the metabolism. Dietary cholesterol does not really affect blood cholesterol very much. Fish. They have a face. Okay, vegetarians, get over it. Most people think fish are pretty healthy. And so there's an outer core of those things that maybe the keto and the low-fat vegans won't buy into, but I think everybody else does if this was zone, Mediterranean, paleo. I mean, there's, other than the ultra extremes, there's even that core that most of them would agree with. And then after that, when you get into poultry and grains, think about that for a minute. So Kentucky Fried Chicken versus pasture-raised, organic, whatever, chicken, braised and not deep fried. For grains, how about steel-cut oats versus white bread? That's just really not the same thing for grains. So pick those. And my outer core that's the most controversial, I think, is dairy and red meat. And I still think there's room there that if we were honest and got together, yogurt, plain yogurt, not low-fat yogurt that's pineapple, guava, raspberry, that has as much sugar as soda, just plain yogurt, versus Go-Gurt, which, does that even have yogurt in it? I'm not sure if it has yogurt in it. And on the meat side, right? So are we talking hot dogs and a lot of processed red meat, or are we talking regenerative farming, lean cut, whatever? I think by the time I've had the privilege of sitting in with the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, the Menus of Change that came up with some principles. I'm always kind of stunned how much a group of scientists looking at the evidence agree on almost everything when we get together for these. And it's just when we get into the social media world and some other things and some media headlines that it seems like, whoa, whiplash. Oh my God, everything you knew for the last 50 years is clearly wrong. And then you look at the dietary guidelines for Americans, which apparently caused obesity, and you see updated every 5 years since 1980. The changes have been so painfully, incrementally slow. It's not like there was no whiplash there, people. It was always very incremental. Go back and look. It'll say, watch your calories, avoid added sugar, avoid saturated fat, get some exercise. It really wasn't very different in 1980, and it's not like anybody did a 180. So I'm having fun trying to help explain that there is this foundational diet that almost all health professionals agree on, whether it's a cancer, a heart disease, a diabetes, an Alzheimer focus. And yet, sort of this world of precision nutrition is pretty cool. People do have different microbiomes. I think people do have different levels of satiety. I know people who are more satiated on higher fat foods and people who are more satiated on higher fiber foods. And higher fat and higher fiber don't go hand in hand. Those are kind of different foods. So my hope is that we'll come to more of an agreement about more of a foundational diet that, okay, basically, probably everybody should eat these with room to personalize your diet based on some of those other factors is my goal. So should we play around with the fringe and get all hyper excited about, I do better on this little thing? Okay, but now you're having a donut for breakfast. I said, yeah, I know, because what I really need to do is avoid soy or avoid red meat or avoid this thing. But you're having a donut. Yeah. So that's what I like to eat. But I'm into this personal thing around the edges. And no. If we get the core right, then you'll have more room to hedge your bets with some of those things around the outside. Actually, one of my favorite slides that I show all the time now from a study that was with NHANES data, and really nice graphic over time from, I think, 1999 to, let's say, 2016, looking at types of proteins, carbs, and fats. And if you start with the fats, the percentage of energy in the US diet from saturated, poly, and mono is about 10% each, with hardly any change over 20 years. If you go to the protein side and you look at animal versus plant, it's almost always 10% animal, 6% plant, almost with no change, 20 years. If you go to the carbs, it gets broken down into low quality and high quality carbs. And the high quality carbs is 10% pretty much the whole time. Now I've left one thing out for the end. So just think about it. What's left? 40% of energy from crappy carbs. It's like, oh, do we have room for a lower carb diet? Yes, almost half our calories. And so fun thing for me is, could you replace all of that 40% with high quality carbs? That would be high. If you were eating a crap ton of vegetables and a crap ton of beans, it would be hard to get that many calories, 40% of your diet from more vegetables and beans. And if you're trying to do it all from mono and polyunsaturated fats, you'd have to be drinking cups of olive oil to hit that. So I don't really know any way you could do it without replacing some of it with high quality carbs and some of it with unsaturated fats. An interesting little tidbit is, if you go across different studies that I've run, because I keep noticing this, no matter what kind of diets I put people on, protein hardly ever changes. It's dramatic. Like, people talk about a 30 or 35% protein diet. None of my studies, and I haven't focused on a high protein diet, but I've had arms doing low carb, and low carb was wiping out a lot of grains and fruits and beans and not veggies, keep going on the veggies. And so that meant more eggs and more yogurt and more fish and more meat and chicken. And yet at the end of the day, the protein content has barely nudged as a percent of calories in the diet. So it's really stunningly in a real diet. And if you go from country to country across the world, very consistent, 15 to 20% protein. So it's really, if you wiped all those calories from carbs out, the crappy ones, it has to be some balance of more carbs and more fats. And it's too hard to do just one or the other. So you will end up with a lower carb diet. And I like to type this, but the laptop always corrects me. I type little LOW, big ER. Like this is a lower than I was eating before, but I don't know if it's 20% or 30% or 40% calories, but it's not 50 or 60 because a crap ton of those are added sugars and refined grains, and those aren't doing anybody any good.
Or some people call it low quality carbs. I eat a low quality carb diet. Some people like to use that
the LLC, the low LLQC, the low quality carb diet. Yes, I would be a fan of that. And then the challenge is always translating that. What does that mean?
Right. On this note of the nomenclature, and people get so upset. I started also saying the videos lower carb, lower fat, because we started featuring some studies, and even when the studies use in the title low carb diet, low fat diet, it's usually not the extreme version. It's usually 20% or 30% of calories, and immediately you get a torrent of hate mail. It wasn't low carb. It wasn't low fat. Useless study.
Yes,
because if it isn't exactly the range for some people, the low is 20, and for some it's 10, and for some it's 5. So you never please everybody. So it'd be great to, in your experience actually running these trials, if you could speak a bit on this issue of adherence, like how hard is it when you put people on, we try to get people on a 8% of calories coming from carbohydrate or from fat, and especially if it's longer term, how hard is it to get humans to stick to these diets?
So hard. Okay, so you could do a Kevin Hall study where he says domicile, I say incarcerate. I think he incarcerates them with prison bars and guards at the windows, when the food gets slipped under the door. You can do that. My favorite study is an example, and I want to make sure I put this in the right context. The pounds loss study is my favorite example of this. Largest weight loss study ever, 800 people, longest time ever, 2 years. Elegant design on paper. So there's 2 levels of protein, 2 levels of fat, and 4 levels of carb to make it work. So the protein is either 15 or 25% protein. 15 is on the low side and 25 is on, those aren't extreme, but they're very different, 15 and 25. The fat is 20 or 40%. Is 20 low enough to be low fat? Yeah, it's lower fat than most people get. And 40, yeah, that's sort of even maybe more than Mediterranean. And to make that work, the carbs had to be 65, 55, 45, or 35. So on paper, it was elegant. At the end of the study, 2 years later, and there's 4 groups, right? Because there's all those different things are into 4 groups. The protein intake across the 4 groups on average was either 20 or 21%, not 15 or 25. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get 15 or 25. And the fat range was supposed to be 20 to 40. And it was only 8% different. It was like 35 to 27 or something like that. And the carbs was supposed to be 65 to 35. It was much lower than that. So, the lowest thing was probably 45-ish, which most people wouldn't call low carb.
Right.
I think even if you got dietitians, paid professional dietitians, and said, okay, I want you to eat 37.5% of this and 42.5% of that, or even round it up, you get 30, 20, 50, and you get 20, 40, 20, or 40. They couldn't do it. You can't eat food. Like, is that every meal? Okay, no, every meal is a little harsh. How about every day? Whoa, that at the end of the day, you'd be sitting there with a calculator thinking, crap, I had so much of that at lunch. I'm going to have none of that at dinner. How about every week? That could be a little more feasible, but you'd still be messing with your calculator. So this idea of hitting percentages is just not attainable unless you domicile or incarcerate people, which is why, can I give a plug for our Diet Fit study and our approach?
Sure.
We call the approach limbo titrate quality. And it's so funny that they actually gave me the money and published the paper, because we were having a healthy low carb and a healthy low fat. We never defined what that was. We never said it was a percentage. And this was because of my experience doing these studies. I know people can't hit it. And partly because the reason we ran Diet Fits was we were trying to see, we assumed there would be a massive spread of success and failure across both diets. And we just wanted to give both of them the best chance possible. It's a term I like to call equipoise. Make them both very challenging, give them both lots of support, have dietitians who are teaching them be proud that they're teaching the best low carb and the best low fat that they can. But as we recruited people, I said, I think you might be predisposed because of a genetic predisposition or a metabolic predisposition of insulin resistance to do better than the person across from you who's being assigned to the same diet. And I'm guessing at some point in the study, you're going to come into situations where you show up for one of our supportive classes and somebody says, God, this is so easy, I'm kicking butt. And you're working your ass off and it's not happening for you. And you don't shame yourself. I think there might be a reason that this person is more successful with lowering their carb or fat than you. Please just do the best you can. So the whole principle was, in the first 8 weeks of the 1-year study, go limbo. Go as low as you can. Lower. Can you go lower? Come on, I'm pushing you. Lower, lower. 10%, less than 10%, fat or carb. And we told them right away, that's not where we want you to be at the end of the study. We want you to be at the diet that you could look us in the eye and say, this works for me. I could do this for the rest of my life. I don't want it to be, whew, study's over, thank God I can eat again, because that's not going to be very generalizable for the public, right? So after you did this limbo thing and you hit whatever the lowest you could, you didn't get kicked out if you didn't meet it. There was no exclusion for not meeting it. We said, we're kind of psychologically anchoring you and trying to say, you are in a study. You are going to make the biggest change possible to lower one or the other. And now you're in the titrate phase. Now add a little back. How are you doing? You feel okay? Oh, you're still craving things? Okay, add a little more back. Okay, doing okay. Want to add a little more back? Oh, the weight's coming back on. Is that bugging you? Were you happy with that weight loss? Okay, go back down a little. And so we asked them to titrate and find the place that was lowest for them that they could maintain without giving them a number, without saying, unless you hit 20 or 25, you failed and you didn't succeed in the study. So this is for your own personal success. The grant, reviewers let us do that. And the reviewers who looked at our paper let us do that. The third quality there was limbo titrate quality. And we said, just whatever you do, don't do it by going to the store and buying the thing that emblazoned on it says low carb or low fat cookies, cakes, chips, whatever. We want this to be whole foods. And so we want you to go to the farmer's market if you can. We know there's some cost and access barriers, so we don't want you to break the bank doing this, but limbo titrate quality, and you end up where you end up. And actually, the way we kind of framed it was, we said, America's waiting to know what a realistic low fat and what a realistic low carb diet. And when we have 300 people in each group, how much does that differ? Because we don't all expect you to hit the same thing. We think you are individuals and we think there is room for this personalized precision nutrition, and we want it to work for you, whichever group you're in. Do the best you can. So it kind of cracks me up that I didn't get slammed by grant reviewers who are often very rigid. What do you mean you're not going to match protein in these diets? You're going to have one group go low fat and low carb. What if it's the protein? I need you to match the protein at 18.2%. I've had that comment in the past, and we let protein run wild. And at the end of the day, it was almost the same in both groups, but we didn't try to match it because that would have been very artificial and challenging. And I know we would have failed in these human intervention studies with real foods. You can't do it. You can't hit 1%.
Yeah, I think this is a lot of times what's missing from these discussions is precisely this aspect of the applicability to the real world, because people want these experiments to be just this perfect numbers, everything matches, which you can do in a Kevin Hall setting, but then what's the relevance of that for the real world? I mean, if people can't stick to the diet, what's the point of knowing what is the perfect diet for weight loss if nobody can do it? Or if people can do it for a couple of months and then fall off the wagon after a year or two, there's no point, because you're not going to house the entire population in a metabolic ward. So at the end of the day, you need things that actually work in the real world. But of course, we have some exceptions, some people who are very gung-ho and who can stick to these extreme diets.
Yeah.
And so I'm always wondering, what is it from Diet Fits? It didn't seem to be explained, if I remember correctly, from those genetic factors that you guys looked at. So do we know if it's just discipline that these guys just push themselves harder, or is it like a metabolic difference? Do they like these foods better? Do we have an idea of what allows some people to stick to some diets better than others?
So that one of the theories I'm left with is satiety. So a fun thing that I was looking at was an overview of diets and weight loss. It was put out by the American Heart Association, the American College of Cardiology, and the Obesity Society. And they summarized all the diet trials, and they said, here's all the different kinds of diets. And really what we find is they all work to some extent for some people. There's a little more evidence for some than others. And there was a little paragraph in there that I just loved, and I cling to, even though I think most people didn't even see it. And it said, we did see a range of prescribed caloric restriction and achieved caloric restriction. And my eyes lit up, because in Diet Fits, we didn't give them a caloric value to hit. It was just low carb or low fat. Traditional weight loss studies have always perpetuated the myth that Kevin Hall has busted, that a pound of weight loss is 3,500 calories, which divides up nicely over 7 days of the week into a 500 calorie deficit per day for a week. So if you wanted to lose 10 pounds for 10 weeks in a row, you need to have a 500 calorie deficit, which means first you have to figure out what you need to maintain your weight. And then you have to subtract 500. And then you have to eat exactly that much, which is really hard on a day-to-day basis. And what Kevin has shown is every week that you're losing weight, that number actually gets higher. It's not a 500 calorie deficit. That's for the first few pounds. Then it's a bigger deficit. And the bigger the deficit, the more the cravings come. And so in our study, we never had a prescribed calorie restriction. But what they did was they reported eating about 500 calories a day less, because since they couldn't eat all those high fat foods, or they couldn't eat all those high carb foods, they didn't actually make up for them by eating the same number of the other kind of foods. They just didn't eat those, and they ended up eating fewer foods. And I think what happened, why some people were more successful than others, is some were more satiated than others. I've asked this question in my class a couple times, Gil, and so maybe you can ask your listeners and we'll see if they respond. I said, picture sort of a cheesy egg breakfast versus some steel-cut oats with some berries and skim milk on it, something like that. And I find some of my students say, oh my God, that oats, I would feel bloated and full, and it would be a really long time before I would eat again. And somebody else will say, I'd be hungry in a minute. If I ate that, I'd be hungry within an hour and I'd have to eat again. And how about those cheesy eggs? And some say, oh, cheesy eggs, oh, that sounds pretty rich. I could only eat so much. And another kid said, oh, give me a second helping. Oh, I could eat like multiple helpings of cheesy eggs. I could just be pounding those down. And one time when I took the poll, it was almost half and half in the class as to which one they thought would be more satiating. This is anecdotal, so never published anything like this. In the middle of these studies, someone gets in a car accident, they get divorced, they lose their job, and it's like, just smile, be in the study, have a great time, eat. And they're like, dude, I'm ready to drop out. My life sucks. I have just this insane amount of stress. Okay, I looked and you're not eating what you're supposed to. Are you kidding? My life, you're lucky I'm showing up right now. Actually, turns out the other way. A couple times we've had people say, my life is so hard right now. Thank you for letting me be in this study. This is like something that's holding me together. It's like, I need to do this for science. It's a little bit of control I have over my life. But you can tell that some of these life events that are really disruptive for people sort of blow this whole idea of willpower or personal whatever. Life happens. And so that's a clear factor that's in here. I think satiety is a clear factor. We actually just published a paper that looked at respiratory quotient. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Right. So if you're only burning carbs, your RQ is about 1. And if you're only burning fats, your RQ is about 0.7. And most people on a given day in the morning when they wake up have an RQ of something like 0.82, which means they're burning fat and carbs. Go back to Diet Fits and look, the people who had the highest RQ to begin with, who got randomized to low carb, did a little better than the others. They were eating low carb, high fat, and lowered their RQ. And they did a little better than the people who had a low or relatively low RQ and got randomized to low carb, high fat, because I'm just speculating, they didn't have much room to lower that RQ. So this sort of baseline respiratory quotient of, here's another little tweaky personal thing. What is the balance of carbs and fats that you burn on any given day? There isn't that much variability, but there is some. That's what we published in this paper just 2 weeks ago. There were actually a couple of things that we found, sort of digging deeper, all secondary hypotheses, all more sort of hypothesis generating than hypothesis testing. But the next study might find people and check out their RQ. Given all this variability that we're seeing in the studies that we do, something explains it. So I'm very curious to know what explains it. Is it satiety? Is it the microbiome? Is it the RQ? Are these things that will, and what percent of the noise will that explain? So there's a bunch of people who overexpress insulin when they're eating carbs, and the insulin puts their glucose away so fast, it goes hypoglycemic. A small percentage of people. But there's these people who are hungrier after they eat carbs because they overly express insulin. That's a piece. And they're learning that because they have all these folks wearing continuous glucose monitors. And so as people contribute to those databases in a big way, we're learning things. And I think the things that we're learning are fun, and I think it will get better. But it won't change the foundational diet. It'll just complement for some people.
It will tailor it to individual needs and individual preferences, maybe.